Hello, I'm Sebastian. Welcome to Nine Nar Trees podcast. Today, I will summarize and review the book. Globalization and its Discontents by Joseph E. Stiglitz examines why the promise of a more integrated world economy has often collided with lived realities of instability, inequality, and political backlash. Written by a Nobel Prize-winning economist and former chief economist of the World Bank, the book draws on policy experience to explain how international economic rules are made, who influences them, and how they affect developing and developed countries alike. Stiglitz focuses on the roles of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the U.S. Treasury in shaping crisis responses and reform programs, arguing that certain standard prescriptions have too frequently deepened recessions and social pain rather than restoring growth. Instead of rejecting globalization outright, the book makes the case for better governance, greater transparency, and policy approaches that respect local conditions. It is both an accessible guide to core debates in global economics and a forceful critique of how globalization has been managed. I will give you key takeaways from this book. Firstly, the promise of globalization and the roots of public anger. Stiglitz frames globalization as a powerful set of forces that can expand markets, spread technology, and reduce poverty when supported by fair rules and capable institutions. The problem, he argues, is not cross-border exchange itself, but the way benefits and risks have been distributed. Many countries experienced growth spurts, yet others faced heightened volatility, weakened bargaining power for workers, and rising inequality. In this view, discontent grows when people see trade and capital mobility paired with fragile safety nets, limited job mobility, and political systems that appear to answer more to financial interests than to citizens. The book also highlights how globalization can constrain domestic policy choices, especially for smaller economies that depend on foreign credit or export access. That constraint becomes politically explosive when austerity measures or rapid liberalization are perceived as imposed from outside. Stiglitz emphasizes that social outcomes matter as much as GDP, and that legitimacy depends on whether ordinary households feel more secure, not merely whether aggregate numbers improve. By connecting macroeconomic decisions to everyday consequences, the book explains why globalization debates are inseparable from questions of fairness, voice, and democratic accountability. Secondly, how the IMF shaped crisis responses and why it often backfired. A central theme is Stiglitz's critique of the International Monetary Fund's crisis playbook, particularly during emerging market crises. He argues that programs frequently relied on high interest rates, rapid fiscal tightening, and swift financial liberalization even when economies were contracting. In his account, these measures were justified as necessary to restore investor confidence, defend currencies, and curb inflation, but they often intensified recessions by choking credit, pushing firms into bankruptcy, and worsening unemployment. Stiglitz also questions whether the IMF gave sufficient weight to country-specific institutions, political constraints, and the social costs of abrupt adjustment. He presents the idea that capital flight and banking fragility can make orthodox policies self-defeating, since harsh conditions may signal panic rather than stability. Another important strand is governance. The fund is portrayed as influenced by major shareholder countries and by a narrow consensus within financial ministries and central banks. That structure, Stiglitz suggests, can bias recommendations toward protecting creditors and foreign investors, rather than prioritizing recovery and poverty reduction. The topic ultimately asks readers to reconsider what successful stabilization should mean, urging attention to sequencing, social protection, and policies that preserve productive capacity instead of dismantling it. Thirdly, market fundamentalism versus pragmatic development policy. Stiglitz challenges the belief that markets left largely to themselves will reliably deliver efficient outcomes in developing and transition economies. He draws on mainstream economic ideas about information failures, imperfect competition, and incomplete markets to argue that deregulation and privatization are not cures on their own. When institutions are weak, property rights contested, and banking systems underdeveloped, the result of rapid liberalization can be asset stripping, corruption, and concentration of power rather than broad-based entrepreneurship. The book contrasts one-size-fits-all, reform packages with a more pragmatic approach that builds regulatory capacity, supports education and health, and uses industrial and financial policies to foster diversification. Stiglitz's emphasis is not on replacing markets, but on designing rules that make them work for development goals. He also highlights the importance of sequencing. Opening capital accounts before establishing sound supervision can expose countries to destabilizing inflows and sudden stops. By reframing development as institution building, learning, and long-term investment, this topic shows why policy choices cannot be reduced to ideology. It encourages readers to see economic reform as a toolbox where the right mix depends on history, governance quality, and the distributional consequences of change. Fourthly, debt, austerity, and the social costs of adjustment programs. Another key topic is the human and political impact of adjustment policies associated with international lending. Stiglitz argues that when countries face debt crises, the burden of restoring solvency often falls on workers, small businesses, and public services rather than on those best able to absorb losses. Fiscal austerity can cut essential programs, weaken long-term growth by reducing investment, and erode trust in institutions. He also points to the risk of a vicious cycle. Shrinking economies reduce tax revenue, making debt ratios worse and prompting further cuts. The book discusses how conditionality can limit democratic choice, creating resentment when voters feel they are paying for decisions made by distant technocrats or prior elites. Stiglitz highlights distributional questions: who bears currency devaluations, banking rescues, and subsidy removals, and whether the poor are protected during transitions. A recurring argument is that social stability and political legitimacy are economic variables, not afterthoughts. If reforms generate mass unemployment or collapse public health systems, the resulting instability can deter investment and slow recovery. This topic pushes readers to evaluate policy not only by accounting targets, but by its capacity to preserve social cohesion and protect the foundations of future prosperity. Lastly, reforming global economic governance for a fairer globalization. Stiglitz concludes by proposing changes that would make globalization more inclusive and resilient. He argues for greater transparency in international institutions, more balanced representation for developing countries, and decision-making that takes poverty reduction and employment as seriously as inflation and creditor interests. The book emphasizes that global rules on trade, finance, and intellectual property shape what nations can do at home, so those rules should be debated openly rather than negotiated primarily by powerful states and specialized ministries. Stiglitz supports the idea that capital flows need management tools, including prudential regulation and the option of temporary controls during surges or crises. He also stresses the importance of orderly debt restructuring mechanisms, so countries can recover without prolonged depression. On trade, the thrust is that openness should be paired with adjustment support, fair dispute resolution, and safeguards that prevent a race to the bottom in labor and environmental standards. The broader vision is a globalization that rewards productive investment over speculation and that respects the policy space needed for development. This topic helps readers translate critique into constructive agenda setting, showing how reforms in governance can reduce crises, improve legitimacy, and align global integration with shared prosperity. In conclusion, this book best suits readers who want to understand why globalization provokes such strong reactions, including students of economics and political science, policy professionals, journalists, and general readers trying to connect international headlines to household-level outcomes. It is especially valuable for anyone curious about the IMF, World Bank, and crisis management, because it translates institutional decisions into concrete consequences for growth, jobs, and social stability. The main benefit is perspective. Readers learn to question simple slogans about free markets and to evaluate reforms by incentives, institutions, and distributional effects. That mindset can improve how you interpret news about currency crises, austerity debates, trade disputes, and rising inequality. And it can sharpen your ability to discuss policy with nuance rather than ideology. Compared with many books that either celebrate globalization or reject it wholesale, Stiglitz offers a distinctive mix of insider experience and analytical critique, with a consistent focus on governance and fairness. The result is a persuasive case for improving globalization rather than abandoning it, making the book worth buying for readers who want rigorous arguments, real-world relevance, and actionable ideas for reform. If you would like to support Joseph E. Stiglitz, you can buy the book through the Amazon link I've provided in the podcast description. After reading the book, please let me know what you think and share your thoughts. See you around.